So 2020 probably would have brought you a whole host of goals and just exactly what it is you perhaps needed to try and get 2020 done. Where to from here then for your personal finance needs? Warren Ingram, personal financial advisor and executive director at Galileo Capital, joining us this evening. Thank you so much for the time. The 2020 checklist.
Good evening. Good evening. So I think, we always look at these articles and things that come out in the media about New Year's resolutions, etc. And I'm not a big one for those because I think
neither am I. Yeah.
And I think we don't stick to them. So, to me, I think rather let's have a checklist that we need to go through maybe once a year, and the start of the year is always a good thing to do that, and then give yourself some goals to work on. So if there are things, none of us are perfect. I mean, our financial positions can't be exactly right all the time. So it's great just to say, okay, well, what do I need to look at, and then what can I work on, and how do I do that through the year? And I think to me, a checklist or a set of goals should be both positive and negative. In other words, things that are exciting for you, things that motivate you, things that you actually want to aspire to do. And then there are things that you say, well, hang on, maybe I need to cut back here or kind of do a trade-off here or there. So to me, that's the idea of a checklist is what can we look forward to and plan for? And then what do we have to just cut down a bit and get over last year and look for the year ahead? And maybe once a year do this every year.
Yeah. Why, before we get into the actual checklist itself, why is it that we forget these things halfway through the year? I mean, we sit there and say to ourselves, yeah, I'm going to find a way to try and get this done. I'm going to, have all of this stuff set out for the remainder of the year. And then comes, it doesn't have to even be June, March already. And we just sit there going, oh, forget all of that.
So I think it's real human nature. And let me give you my best example is let's look at gyms in South Africa.
Oh boy.
Probably around the world.
Worst time to go to right now.
Yeah. And I'm fanatical. I run kind of 3 times a week. I'm in the gym straight after it 3 times a week, and I've been doing it for 15 years.
Sure.
And so for the first 5 or so years, I was probably because it's early in the morning, I wasn't really awake and I didn't really notice patterns. But what I've realized over the years is that now, so from this week coming up, I think pretty much next Monday, for about 6 weeks, the gym's packed.
Yeah.
And then you notice it starts to get emptier and emptier and emptier. And eventually there'll be a few faces that were new at the start of the year that are still there, and they stick it out. They're the ones that become committed to whatever it was that they decided they want to do from a fitness point of view.
Yeah.
And the gym gets to kind of a new normal. Some people drop off and so they go. And then amazingly, it picks up again. And it picks up somewhere around the beginning of spring. Because then all of a sudden, people kind of get out of the winter mode and they say,
the summer body.
Yeah, I've got to get my summer body. And, they stop making excuses about it was really cold in winter and it was dark and I want to get up. So then human behavior kicks in again and we get a few more that come back in.
Yeah.
Every single year after year, this pattern repeats itself. And I think it's the same with money. I think what happens is we get let's say we get busy, and then at the end of the year we have a bit of time to reflect and to look back and say, oh, hang on, actually it was quite a lot of stuff that I didn't do. Some of it's around money. I didn't save as much as I should have.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the economy. I'm worried about the whole economic climate and the job climate, etc., etc. Let me take action. But that action is not, it might not be difficult from an understanding or a knowledge point of view, but it is going to be difficult from a human behavior point of view because it requires new behaviors. It requires us to reprogram sometimes the way we live. Sometimes it's our brain about, like giving up on certain things which we need to do. And we don't like doing that. That's hard. So what happens is 6 weeks into the new year, as you're saying, by March maybe, kind of people are saying, I've got new excuses for why I can't carry on or whatever it is. I've got busy or whatever, and so they go. But a few people do. And a few people stick to their patterns and their new behaviors. And what's interesting is, I think we chatted about it before in the past. 5 out of every 100 employed South Africans are able to retire.
Yeah.
With enough money.
Yeah, 100%.
And so probably the same proportion of our population can run Comrades Marathon.
Oh boy.
So let's think about it.
Sure.
So it is exceptional to be disciplined, and it is exceptional to actually stick to plans. But that doesn't mean that we should give ourselves, the rest of us who aren't exceptional, that can't run Comrades, because I can't. So for those of us who can't, that doesn't mean that we can't be pretty good. And I think that's what this checklist is about, is to say, okay, so you don't need to run comrades, but, can you do something less than that and still achieve and still move your life forward?
Yeah. Can you at least start off with just a 5-kilometer race at the very least, and then, kick off from there and see what happens from there on? That's kind of the point here.
Exactly right. And I think that's what we're doing now, is let's find a way for people to get to their first financial 5K and from there kick on, and those that do and become the comrades runners of financial world, well done. Those that can't, at least you're better off than you were.
Okay, so here's us kicking it off then with trying to become the comrades runners of the financial world, as you put it there, Warren.
We're going to kill the analogy now.
What's your plan around debt? That's your number one on the checklist.
So the weapon of wealth destruction, as far as I'm concerned, is debt. And the thing about debt is, it's probably the easiest thing to get. The whole financial system makes it really easy to get debt and to spend and use debt, and actually really hard to open savings and investments accounts. It's much harder to open an investment account than it is to get debt. And if you look at how easy it is to use a credit card, for example, it's a difficult thing to do. It's an easy thing to do. It's a difficult thing to avoid. So for me, let's hit the most difficult, most uncomfortable checklist point first, and that's debt. And so, when I say what's your plan around debt, what I mean is, the likelihood is that if you are working in South Africa and you're somewhere in the age of, let's say, 18 to probably 55, somewhere around there, the likelihood is you've got debt. That's the deal in South Africa. And so if you've got the debt, then let's have a game plan around debt. I'm not saying that in 12 months you can get rid of all of your debt. That's not necessarily possible, especially if you financed a car or you've got a house that you've mortgaged. But the deal is, don't let the debt run away with you over the year, because the whole thing about debt is it's the most expensive thing we have. So if you've got credit card or overdraft or personal loans, it's probably costing you somewhere around 25% a year. There is no investment in the world that consistently does that year after year after year. So if you're looking only at your investments and you've got major credit card debt and personal loans, what you need to know is you're probably doubling your debt compared to the growth rates that you can get on your investments. Your debt is growing at twice the pace that your investments are. And that certainly was the case last year. The JSE gave us 12%. Your credit card would have cost you 25. That's double. It's more than double. So let's look at your debt. And the starting point there is to say, look at your most expensive debt. What is the thing that costs you the most interest every year? Not in rand amounts. So in other words, if your mortgage costs you 10% a year, but that costs you 10,000 rand a month because you've got a 1 million rand bond, then you might say, okay, that's my most expensive debt. It's not. It's the thing that, let's say you owe 5,000 rand on your credit card, and that's costing you 25%, that's your most expensive debt. So the deal there is, get rid of your most expensive debt. Get rid of the credit cards, the personal loans, the overdrafts. And if you were one of those people that did the fly now, pay later on holiday, then it's now time to take the early pain in the year and say, okay, now I've got to get rid of those debts first and then focus on other things. But I think for now, it's get a debt plan. So look at your most expensive debt, give yourself a game plan to say, I'm going to pay it off over 1, 2, or 3 months, whatever that is. And then say, can I pay off a little bit extra into my car if you've got car debt, and can I pay a bit extra into my home loan if you've got a home loan, and start there. That's a great starting point.
So sort of write all of it down, right? Get yourself perhaps some sort of list and just say to yourself, this is all the debt I have, and know the interest rates of all your debt. You'd be surprised at how many people don't actually know at what interest rate their credit card sort of charges them, their overdraft facility, their revolving credit facilities, which you maybe had as well with some others. And just even, yes, you may have negotiated how much you have for your home loan with that rate, but now you've completely forgotten and just let it go by. So getting all of that together, get it all out right now, and do the checklist so that you can plan around your debt. Warren will continue this conversation as well just in a moment or two there. Your 2020 checklist, that was item number 1. We'll get into the rest of it right after this.
The Money Show. Personal finance.
Yep, we're continuing with our personal finance features. Nearly 20 minutes after 7 o'clock then on this Thursday evening. Warren Ingram, personal finance advisor, personal financial advisor and executive director at Galileo Capital, joining us in studio for this. Your 2020 checklist. We had started off with your first point on this checklist. And what is your plan around debt is pretty much what we're talking about there. All right. So item number 2 then, Warren. Have you had any big life changes? What could those be?
So it's interesting that that when you ask people that, is there anything big happened in your life, and they go no, and then they say, oh, actually, later in the conversation, I got engaged.
And you're just well, that's huge.
That's kind of a big life change, because inevitably that means to me that someone's getting married after that. And so big life changes would be things like, there's a pregnancy in the family, there's a marriage, potentially a divorce, on the other side. Maybe there are grandchildren that need to be planned for, potentially someone's getting retrenched, that's the climate we live in. All of those classify as big life changes.
Yeah.
And quite interestingly, and I think my last two relate to children, around that you might have kids going to different education, in other words, junior school to high school to varsity, or that your kids are actually leaving the house.
Yeah,
you've done your job. The birds have left the nest. It's now time. All of those classify, and in that situation, that has some quite big financial implications for you, either positive or negative. And I think again, it's around the checklist of saying, okay, so if you're engaged, for example, have you started looking at prenup contracts, antenuptial contracts, because those are important? Have you started talking to your partner around, look, how does your money work and how does mine work? And, do we now have a debt plan?
Yeah.
And do we
that can't be the last conversation you have, right? That kind of has to be somewhere in the first parts of everything, really.
Yeah. Once you figured out the chemistry works, the next thing is now our money needs to kind of align. And so it's those kinds of conversations. Or, if you're really worried about your career and you think that, almost the writings on the wall at work, have you discussed that at home? Is there a family game plan around this? And I think a lot of the time people put their heads in the sand and they hope that things will just kind of turn out okay. And my view is that you need to come home as quickly as possible, discuss it with the family as fast as possible, and develop a game plan around that. So it's just a case of saying, just stop and think for a second about have big things happen in life, and have you done anything that is necessary? You might have just got caught up in the moment of the engagement, or maybe let's talk about the horrible one, divorce. And you kind of just get divorced, and obviously emotionally a huge issue, but financially it's possibly the most devastating thing that happens to you. And don't just be overwhelmed by the event. You've got to deal with it, and it's very difficult. You talk to a lot of divorced people, and then that's the sort of first year or two, they're just frozen. And they don't deal with the issues. And I think it's a case of saying, hang on, maybe just do one thing per month to kind of get through this, start solving the problems one step at a time. And I liked your point about, write it down and just itemize whatever it is that's happened that you need to do, and then just tick that list off one at a time.
Yeah, it gets really hard, as you said, whatever the case might be. For example, leaving, if the kids leave the birds leave the nest, as you noted a little bit earlier, as you said, it may become very difficult. Either you have more disposable income, or you actually have less, depending on if they're going to varsity at that point as well, right? So it does change exactly what's in the pocket, what's not in the pocket, and how much longer you have to plan for when it comes to those things.
Exactly right. And I think that, the interesting thing about money is that the quicker you address whatever the issue is, good or bad, the bigger the impact. So if you've got kids, let's say, leaving home and now they're at varsity, and that means you've got to pay for res or whatever the deal is, then, and that's not expensive, then don't just let it happen without some kind of a plan. Because if your outgoings are now bigger than they were last year, then you've got to figure out how you can reduce your other outgoings. What else are you going to do? What other sacrifices do you need to make to sort that out? But don't get to the end of this year, end of 2020, saying, gee, my debt just suddenly exploded. I don't know how it happened. It happened because your outgoings got bigger.
Sure. All right. Keep those in check then. Have you had any big life changes? And then number 3, are your investments and your financial goals still aligned? Is that still aligned to your plans, still aligned to your marriage, still aligned to your kids, or is it all of the above?
Exactly right. And for example, let's look at last year. Now, last year was just a really difficult year to kind of just live in South Africa.
Yeah.
We were so
all around.
Yeah, up in the air. And so what might have happened in a year like last year was that you were saving and putting the money away, but not necessarily investing it. In other words, the cash balances got bigger, if you're one of the fortunate few who could do that. And so now you've started January with a lot more cash than probably you should have. So you've got potentially an investment, which is cash is really a short-term thing.
Yeah.
And you've got a long-term, investment strategy, but your cash is short-term. So there it's a case of saying, well, actually you need to make a plan for that. You can't just leave the cash and just worry about it later, because what's happening is inflation's eroding it, tax is eroding it. So don't just leave it. On the other side, if you're getting closer and closer to retirement, for example, and you need to start developing some common income strategy from your investments, now's the time. If your life is changing, then make sure your investments are aligning with that. So it's just a case of saying, where are you in life, and is your investment strategy aligning with those life goals that you have got? If they're not life goals, if they're just life events that have happened, make sure everything's lining up.
Yeah, and again, this brings up the point of writing it all down, right? Being able to actually set those goals, say to yourself, this is actually what I would like to achieve at some point. And it can be small things, right? So everything from traveling, right through to groceries, right through to, kids having to go away to varsity. Writing all those things down and aligning them to ensure that they're actually a firm part of your budgeting process, your living process, and your spending capacity as well for the year ahead.
And I mean, I think you can pretty much put it down on one A4 piece of paper. We're not talking about a whole thesis. This doesn't have to be rocket science. If I understand this stuff, I promise you everybody can. This is not really, I know it's difficult to do, but it's not difficult to understand. That's the difference here. And it literally can be on a page. My biggest point there would be, if you're in a serious relationship, if you're married, this has to be a joint set of goals, because it's really tough to watch sometimes where one partner takes on more of the almost the emotional responsibility of the finances, if not necessarily the actual financial responsibility, and they get worn down by this, and I think it must be a shared responsibility. Things work better when you do it together.
Yeah, always do. Okay, well, here's an interesting one then, one that I don't think a lot of people think about. They just think to themselves, well, I can just put out money there. It's all right. I'm still within budget because by the end of the month, I still have some left over. But it hasn't gone to where you thought it would be or should be going to anyway. So have you got a spending plan?
So most of us, it's just human nature. We don't budget. So
yeah.
Let's just face it. I'm not saying don't budget. You really should. But if your eyes kind of glaze over while I'm saying, you really should budget, then let's park it. And let's just say for a second, why don't you just have a spending plan? In other words, look at what, and a lot of the time now you can find them on banking apps, where your bank actually tells you how you've spent your money. And just look at it and say, for the last 2-3 months, how have I already spent my money? Yes, yeah. December was holiday time, so maybe you can ignore that because that's not a normal way of spending.
Yeah. Becomes an anomaly.
But just understand that, hang on, I actually spend a heck of a lot of money on getting my coffee on the way to work every morning, my nice takeaway coffee. I'm buying 2 or 3 from, the little coffee vendor around the corner at the office. And, by the end of the month, you look at it and you go, hang on, I'm spending like 2,000 Rand a month on coffee. Yeah. Is that really what I want to spend my money on? If it is, great. It's a clear and conscious decision to say, this is how I want to spend my money. I'm not saying don't spend it, but just decide. And if that's how you want to spend your money, and you've got some other goals, for example, one of my favorite is, what's the positive? And for me, the positive will always be holidays. What's the thing that motivates me? So I'm happy to sacrifice a coffee or two to kind of put that money away for a nice holiday. So it's just a case of saying, what is it that you want to do? And if you're one of those people that said, I'm getting a gym membership, the New Year's resolution, you've done that now, just know that means that you've got something else that's going to go off your bank account on a monthly basis. What are you going to give away so that you do go to gym?
Exactly.
And just have a game plan around your spending. Don't just let those expenses carry on for the next year without consciously knowing, okay, this is roughly how my money gets spent every month. And it's something you should do at the start of the year, definitely. But there's no harm in doing it 6 months later to say, well, this is what I kind of gave myself as my spending plan. 6 months later, am I on track?
Yeah.
Is it working? Great. If it's not, take it more seriously.
And your favorite, what are your holiday plans, and what's the plan to save for them?
So I can't spend my whole life, for example, drinking just tap water and eating broccoli. It might be healthy for me, but I'll probably die of unhappiness. So it's the same with holidays. For me, I'm happy to make sacrifices on other things, on the way I spend, on certain things. But I need to have something to look forward to. And I can't just say all of my money is going to go to my retirement, which is, a whole lifetime away. I need to do that as well, but I need to have other things that I look forward to. So one of the things I would do for myself is I'd say, okay, if I commit to saving X amount of money every month, then I'm also going to save a little bit extra for my holidays, and I know where I'm going. I can tell you already, my January, part of the deal with my wife and I is we've already got the holidays in the diary. We haven't paid for them, of course, but they're in. The time's blocked out, and we've committed to what we want to do, and now we start to look forward to it, because what we've done is we've made sure our savings plan is done, our spending plan's done, and part of our spending plan is our holiday and how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, pretty much done the same. Actually, I've prepared for my holidays as well this year. Very quickly, the last one. Have you got a will?
I ask this question of people starting work and people halfway through their working careers very often. And I'll just say in a show of hands, who's got a will? And about half the room puts up their hand to say they have got a will. So then I'll say, right, put down your hands. Parents, please put up your hands. All put up their hands. And I say, please keep your hand up if you haven't got a will. And that's terrifying. How many parents don't have a will?
Sure.
So that's something it's a tough one. We don't like talking about it. That means someone's going to die when your will kicks in, but that's a big one. So just make sure you get a will.
Yeah. So that's the 2020 checklist. Warren, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for that. What's your plan around your debt? Have you had any big life changes? Are your investments and your financial goals still aligned? Have you got a spending plan? What are your holiday plans, and what's the plan to save for them? And have you got a will? Personal financial advisor and executive director at Galileo Capital, Warren Ingram, helping us with our 2020 checklist.